Preface. Mynovabooks presents The Firebird Across Cultures by Clara Whitmer, a nonfiction educational tour of 3 legendary bird figures, the Slavic Firebird, the Persian Simurgh, and the Indigenous North American Thunderbird, and the shared motifs they carry across cultures. Expect a concise, respectful exploration of themes like guidance, mystery, renewal, and transformation, with close readings, mythic retellings, and tools for spotting motifs in other stories. To explore more, please visit mynovabooks.com. The following voice will narrate your audiobook experience.
Hi, I'm Evelyn Hart. I will be the narrator for this story.
Now sit back and enjoy. Now reading The Firebird Across Cultures.
One night, on a window ledge rimmed with frost, a single feather lay glowing like a tiny coal. It did not look like it belonged to any ordinary bird. In the dark room, it made its own circle of light, just big enough to warm a pair of curious hands. If you could follow that light back through time and across the world, it would lead you into many different stories. In Russia and other Slavic lands, it might fall from the tail of the Firebird in the mountains of Persia. It could be a feather from the wise Simurgh. On the thunder-washed coasts and prairies of North America, it might belong to the mighty Thunderbird. These birds do not live in the same forests or under the same names, yet they share a strange kinship. Each one is a winged messenger that carries fire, wisdom, or storm. Each one stands at the border between our everyday world and something larger. In East Asia, too, there are cousins to this glowing feather. Chinese stories tell of the Feng Huang, sometimes called the Chinese phoenix, an omen of virtue and imperial harmony, and Japanese traditions speak of the Hongog, Maze, often written Ho-o in English, a radiant bird associated with peace and royal change. We will not follow those birds in detail here, but it helps to know they circle in the same wide sky of ideas, showing that this image of a mighty, fiery, or shining bird is truly global. Why do so many cultures imagine powerful, glowing birds? Part of the answer lies in the birds themselves. Birds rise higher than we can, so they seem like natural go-betweens for earth and sky. Fire and lightning are bright, dangerous, and life-giving all at once. When people join birds with flame, or wings with storm, they create a shape big enough to hold their hopes and their fears. In this story-like essay, we will walk with 3 of these birds: the Russian Firebird, the Persian Simurgh, and the Native American Thunderbird. Along the way, we will ask what they mean to the people who tell their stories, why certain motifs keep returning, guidance, mystery, rebirth, wisdom, protection, transformation, thresholds, nature, storm, healing, and how we might lay those motifs out in simple patterns. A simple pattern to compare them, or a map of themes. In many Slavic tales, a Tsar has a garden filled with golden apples. One morning, the guards wake to find that the apples have been stolen in the night. The only clue is a single feather left on the ground. It glows so brightly that the whole palace is lit as if by a small sun. The Tsar squints into its fierce light, feeling pride, fear, and desire flare together in his chest. The Tsar shows the feather to his 3 sons. "Whoever brings me the bird that dropped this feather," he says, "will inherit my throne." For a moment, the room is very still, as the promise sinks in. Each brother quietly measuring his own courage against the feather's heat. The oldest son sets out and soon grows tired. The middle son does not get far. The youngest, often called Ivan Tsarevich, or simply the young prince, travels deep into the dark forest. There he sees the Firebird for the first time. A bird whose feathers shine like embers and polished gold, whose tail trails sparks. For a heartbeat, he forgets to breathe. His fear and longing tangled together in his chest. When it lands among the apple trees, the garden glows like dawn at midnight. In some versions, Ivan tries to snatch the Firebird and fails, catching only another feather. The captured feather scalds his palm with shame and stubborn hope. In others, he manages to trap the bird with the help of a talking grey wolf. Either way, the Firebird's light brings trouble as well as wonder. Ivan's journey becomes more complex. To win forgiveness or a greater reward, he must complete harder and harder tasks, meet dangerous people, and make choices that test his heart. The Firebird, or its feather, stays nearby as a reminder of both the promise and the price of this adventure. When we look closely, we can see why the Firebird's feather starts the story. The feather is beautiful, warm, and bright. It offers a shortcut to power. If Ivan captures the bird, he will please his father and gain honor. But the light also exposes things. It shows the Tsar's impatience. It reveals Ivan's own hunger for glory. And later, his capacity for kindness and courage. In this way, the Firebird becomes more than a prize. It is a kind of test. The Firebird also stands for hope in dark times. In many Slavic countries, winters are long and cold. A bird that carries a piece of sunrise in its tail is a natural symbol for the return of warmth and life. Over time, the Firebird has appeared not just in spoken stories, but in paintings, carved boxes, and even in music and ballet, such as Igor Stravinsky's early 20th century ballet, The Firebird. Artists often show it against very dark backgrounds to make its glow more intense. This contrast between darkness and light mirrors the contrast in the stories: risk and reward, danger and rescue, greed and generosity. So the Russian Firebird is both a lantern and a warning sign. It tells listeners that certain gifts are powerful, but costly. If you reach for them, you must be ready to grow. A closer look and a moment in the senses. The Firebird is smaller than a dragon, but larger than any ordinary peacock. A living torch perched on slender legs. Its plumage smells faintly of smoke and resin, as if it has flown through pine forests on fire. When it moves, feathers whisper like paper being turned. When it sings, the sound is high and glass bright, cutting through the dark like a silver bell. Heat rolls softly from its body, enough to thaw frost on branches and turn cold apples into warm gold beneath your fingers. In the shadows beyond its circle of light, the forest presses close, full of damp earth, wet bark, and the quiet crackle of melting ice, making the Firebird's glow feel even more unreal. A pocket of summer in the middle of a winter night. Key motifs at a glance for the Russian Firebird. Slavic tradition. Guidance appears in the way the feather pulls Ivan out of the palace and onto a path of trials. Mystery clings to the bird that steals apples at night and vanishes in sparks. Rebirth and renewal arrive in its association with the return of light after long winters. Wisdom is present, but indirect, shown through the hard lessons Ivan must learn. Protection shows up when the Firebird's quest leads Ivan to allies who save his life. Transformation is central, as the prince's character and fate are remade by following this dangerous beauty. Liminality surrounds the bird, which lives in deep forests and appears at midnight, between safety and wildness, day and night. Nature connection is clear in its ties to orchards, seasons, and the deep woods. Storm and sky are faint motifs here, hinted at in its sudden fiery flights. Healing is subtle, more emotional than physical, as its light repairs despair and brings hope. Fact sheet. The firebird in Slavic folklore. Cultural role. A rare magical creature that tests rulers and heirs, symbolizing both blessing and trouble. Often linked to royal power and the cycle of harsh winters and returning springs. Typical story beats. A glowing feather is found. A quest is ordered. The youngest son ventures into a liminal forest. The firebird is glimpsed, lost, or captured with help from talking animals. A chain of new tasks follows, often involving distant kingdoms, death-like dangers, and resurrection-like returns. In the end, the seeker comes home changed, with honor or hard-won wisdom. Symbolic functions. The firebird stands for desire and ambition, for light that reveals character, for risks that remake a life, and for the stubborn hope that warmth and colour will return after darkness. Now imagine following that glowing feather eastward, up into high, rocky mountains. The air thins. The wind smells of cedar and snowmelt. On a distant peak stands a colossal bird's nest, big enough to hold a house. Here lived the Simurgh, the great bird of Persian myth. In the Persian epic called the Shahnameh, or Book of Kings, written by the poet Ferdowsi, a king has a child named Zal. Zal is born with hair as white as snow. His father, frightened by this difference and by old prophecies, believes the child is unlucky and leaves him on a lonely mountaintop, his hands shaking as he sets the bundle down and forces himself not to look back. But the mountains are watched. The Simurgh sees the helpless infant and, her great heart stirred with pity, cannot turn away. She gathers up the crying child in her talons and carries him to her nest. High above the human world, the Simurgh raises Zal as her own. She teaches him the names of plants and the uses of herbs. She shows him how to listen to the wind and watch the movement of clouds. Under her wings, he grows strong and wise. Years later, when his father regrets his choice and comes searching, his voice rough with shame and longing, the Simurgh gently returns Zal to his human family. Before she goes, she gives him a single feather. Burn this, she tells him, whenever you are in great need, and I will come. Zal holds the feather as if it were a fragment of her wing, feeling braver just to touch its faint, steady warmth. That promise matters. In a later part of the epic, Zal's wife is in danger during childbirth. Remembering the feather, Zal sets it on fire. His hands tremble as the smoke curls upward, carrying his fear and desperate hope into the sky. At once, the Simurgh arrives. She calms the household, shares healing knowledge, and guides them through the crisis. The child is safely born, and the family line continues. Here, the feather is not a tempting treasure, but a medicine, a hotline to wise help. The Simurgh also appears in Persian spiritual writing. In a famous Sufi poem by the Persian poet Farid ud-Din Attar, often called The Conference of the Birds, and first composed in the 12th century, he tells of a flock of birds that travels through many difficult valleys in search of the Simurgh, whom they imagine as the perfect king. They cross valleys of desire, understanding, and more. Many turn back. Only a few, exhausted and thinned by loss, reach the end. There. Instead of meeting a separate, shining bird on a throne, they see their own reflections. Awe and confusion wash over them as they realize that the king they sought has been woven through their longing all along. The poem explains, in a gentle and puzzling way, that the Simurgh is not just outside the seekers. It is also the unity they find among themselves and in the divine. Attar's The Conference of the Birds has been translated many times into modern languages, so readers today can explore the full journey for themselves. Taken together, these stories show the Simurgh as more than just a large, pretty bird. She is a healer, a teacher, and a bridge between human life and something much larger. Whether we call that something fate, nature, or God. Her mountain home marks her as a threshold being, not quite of the earth, not quite of the clouds. Her feathers, often painted in jewel tones like turquoise and gold, suggest beauty. But her main gift is wisdom. For families reading these tales today, the Simurgh can be a picture of caring adults, ancestors, or teachers who shelter and guide us. She also hints that help sometimes arrives from unexpected directions, and that real guidance does not only solve problems, it invites us to grow in understanding. A closer look and a moment in the senses. The Simurgh's body is vast and ancient, with the strong hooked beak of an eagle, the sweeping tail of a peacock, and wings that flash with layered colours: turquoise, copper, deep emerald, and gold. When she settles onto her mountain ledge, the rock trembles slightly under her weight, sending tiny stones skittering down the cliff. The air around her smells of clean snow, wild thyme, and sun-warmed stone. Her feathers make a deep, steady rustle, like pages of a heavy book being turned in a quiet library. When she speaks, her voice carries the low warmth of a hearth and the echo of caves, a sound that seems to answer questions you did not know you had. Under her wings, the air is cool and dry, and the world below feels suddenly distant, as if ordinary troubles have shrunk, and you are sitting in the clear, thin light at the edge of heaven. Key motifs at a glance for the Persian Simurgh. Persian tradition. Guidance here is explicit and tender, as she raises Zal, counsels heroes, and directs seekers through spiritual valleys. Mystery surrounds her age, origin, and high dwelling place at the world's edge. Rebirth and renewal appear in abandoned Zal's rescue and in threatened lives saved during childbirth and battle. Wisdom is her central trait, embodied in her knowledge of herbs, fate, and the inner journey. Protection is strong, from sheltering an outcast child to shielding families in crisis. Transformation is both outer and inner, turning a rejected infant into a hero and frightened seekers into those who see unity. Liminality defines her, nesting between earth and sky, between the human and the divine. Nature connection is deep, in her bond with mountains, plants, winds, and stars. Storm and sky form a quieter motif, present in her lofty flights and cloud-brushing wings. Healing is one of her brightest threads, joining practical medicine with the mending of hearts and destinies. Fact sheet. The Simurgh in Persian myth and mysticism. Cultural role. A cosmic, benevolent bird linked to kingship, justice, and spiritual insight. Revered as both mythic guardian and symbol of divine wisdom. Typical story beats. A vulnerable human is abandoned or endangered. The Simurgh appears from a high hidden nest. She shelters, teaches, or heals. She leaves a feather as a living promise of aid. Later, when the feather is burned or invoked, she returns at a moment of great need, guiding events towards survival, honor, or enlightenment. Symbolic functions. The Simurgh represents wise parenthood, ancestral care, the bridge between ordinary thought and spiritual understanding, and the idea that true help connects personal healing with a larger, sacred pattern. If we follow the image of the great bird across the map again, we cross oceans and arrive in North America. Here, many indigenous nations tell of a powerful sky being, often called the Thunderbird in English. It is important to say at once that there is not just one Thunderbird story. Different nations have their own names, designs, and teachings. Some versions are shared publicly, others are held within the community. What follows is a very general picture, meant to respect those differences rather than erase them. In many stories told by indigenous nations, such as the Haida and Kwakwaka'wakw on the Pacific Northwest coast, the Ojibwe and Menominee around the Great Lakes, and the Lakota and Blackfoot on the plains. The thunderbird is an enormous bird whose wings spread wider than a house. When it flaps its wings, people hear thunder. When it opens and closes its eyes, lightning flashes across the sky. The thunderbird lives on mountains or above the clouds and flies out to hunt or to fight forces that disturb the world's balance, while those below feel both awe and caution whenever storm clouds gather. One common theme describes times of drought or threat. The rivers shrink, or a dangerous being from under the water rises and troubles people and animals, and anxiety spreads like dust through the community. The thunderbird comes, sometimes fighting a huge underwater serpent or spirit in the distance. The clash of these great beings shakes the air. Rain pours down. The lakes and fields are refreshed, and so are the hearts of those who prayed for rain. People see lightning carve bright lines in the sky and hear thunder roll over hills, and they remember the thunderbird's power and protection. For many Indigenous communities, the thunderbird is more than a story about weather. It is tied to identity, ceremony, and place. Its image appears on carved house posts and totem poles, on masks, drums, and woven blankets. These artworks are not just decorations, they are records of relationships and duties. They remind people of the need to respect water, land, and each other. To speak of Thunderbird is often to speak of law, history, and prayer all at once. Because these traditions are alive today, it is especially important to approach them with care. Non-Indigenous writers should avoid treating Thunderbird tales as simple fantasy or as property that anyone can change. The safest path is to listen to and cite Indigenous storytellers, and to remember that some details are not meant for everyone. Still, even from a respectful distance, we can see how the thunderbird fits the pattern of great mythic birds. It is a mediator between sky and earth. It uses light and sound, not to tempt a single hero, but to keep whole communities in balance. A closer look and a moment in the senses. The thunderbird's silhouette cuts across the clouds like a living piece of night, edged in white and electric blue. Its beak is strong and hooked. Its wings, when they spread, feel as wide as a valley. As it passes overhead, the air turns heavy and charged, making hair lift on the backs of necks. The smell of rain and wet stone rushes in before the first drop falls. Each slow wing beat brings a deep, rolling boom that you feel in your ribs as much as you hear with your ears. Lightning flickers at the edges of its feathers, brief white veins that leave green after-images on the eye. When it finally cries out, the sound is raw and long, like wind tearing over high cliffs, both frightening and strangely comforting, because it means water is coming to thirsty ground. Key motifs at a glance for the thunderbird. Many Indigenous North American traditions, in broad outline, guidance appears in the way Thunderbird teachings direct communities toward respect for land, water, and law. Mystery is strong, since this being is often glimpsed only in storm, and many details remain held within specific nations. Rebirth and renewal are vivid in the return of rain after drought and the restoring of balance after danger. Wisdom is present in the thunderbird's role within ceremonial life and oral history. Protection is central, as the thunderbird battles harmful spirits and shields communities. Transformation shows itself when parched landscapes, smoky skies, or troubled times are reshaped by storms into something livable again. Liminality defines the thunderbird, who lives at the border of cloud and mountain, appearing where sky meets earth and calm breaks into storm. Nature connection is intense, grounding the bird in rain, rivers, coasts, prairies, and the great cycles of migration and weather. Storm and sky are its brightest motifs, thundering at the very heart of its being. Healing comes through cooled air, filled reservoirs, refreshed soil, and the mended relationships that ceremonies and teachings support. Fact sheet. The Thunderbird in Indigenous North American cosmologies. In respectful, general terms. Cultural role. A powerful sky being associated with specific nations, clans, and ceremonial duties. Embodying sovereignty, protection, and relationship to place. Typical story beats. Imbalance appears, often as drought, disrespect for natural laws, or the rise of a dangerous underwater power. The Thunderbird arrives from mountains or upper worlds. Thunder, lightning, and rain follow. Conflict plays out between sky and underworld beings. The land and people are renewed. Stories, songs, and art carry these events forward as teachings. Symbolic functions. The Thunderbird represents the power of weather and the sacredness of water. The responsibilities communities hold toward the more than human world. And the idea that true protection involves keeping relationships with land, ancestors, and future generations in good order. Readers who wish to learn more can seek out Thunderbird teachings that Haida, Kwakwaka'wakw, Ojibwe, Menominee, Lakota, Blackfoot, and other nations have chosen to share publicly, always following each community's guidance about respectful listening and use. Now we return to the glowing feather on the windowsill. By now we have followed it through a Russian garden, a Persian mountain, and skies over North America. In each place, the feather changed colour and weight. In Russia, it was ember hot and risky, asking, "What will you do for this light?" In Persia, it smelled of cedar and medicine, and asked, "Whom will you care for, and what will you learn?" In many Indigenous North American stories, a single feather might hum with the memory of thunder and rain, reminding people, how will you live in balance with this land? Across these differences, several shared themes stand out. The first is guidance. None of these birds are simple pets. They do not sit quietly on a perch. Instead, they pull people onto paths. The Firebird drags Ivan out of the safe palace and into forests where he must decide who he wants to be. The Simurgh lifts Zal out of danger and gives him tools to heal others. The Thunderbird pushes entire villages to remember their ties to rivers, soil, and one another. Through light, counsel, or storm, each bird answers human confusion with a kind of direction. The second is mystery. These birds are never fully explained. The Firebird appears in the dark, steals apples, and vanishes in sparks. The Simurgh lives at the edge of the world or at the top of a mythic mountain. The Thunderbird hides in cloud and cliff, more felt than seen. They belong to thresholds, dawn and dusk, mountain tops, storm fronts, dream states. In this way, they let people talk about the unknown, about death, fate, spirit, and change, without needing detailed maps of the invisible. The third is renewal, or rebirth. For the Firebird, this renewal is close to the classic phoenix, an image of light returning after darkness, of life after winter or disaster. For the Simurgh, renewal often means healing a body or a broken relationship, or reuniting seekers with a sense of meaning. For the Thunderbird, renewal is the rain that ends a long dry spell, the storm that clears smoke from the air. All three say, in different voices, that endings are not the whole story. To make these patterns even clearer, we can imagine a quick comparison of their themes. Take 10 motifs: guidance, mystery, rebirth, wisdom, protection, transformation, liminality, nature connection, storm and sky, healing. And imagine their strength for each bird on a scale from 0 to 3, where 0 means absent, 1 means present but faint, 2, important, and 3 means central. In this matrix, guidance would be high for all 3. Perhaps a 2 for the Firebird, a 3 for the Simurgh, and a 3 for the Thunderbird. Mystery would be 3 across the board, since all 3 are elusive threshold beings. Rebirth would rate as 3 for the Firebird, 3 for the Simurgh, and 3 for the Thunderbird, though each expresses renewal differently. Wisdom might be a modest 1 or 2 for the Firebird, and a bright 3 for the Simurgh, and a 2 for the Thunderbird. Protection would glow at 1 or 2 for the Firebird, but 3 for both Simurgh and Thunderbird. Transformation would score high for all 3, as they change people, places, and destinies. Liminality would be a 3 for each bird, tying them to borders between worlds. Nature connection would shine as a strong motif everywhere, but perhaps brightest, at 3, for the Simurgh's mountains and the Thunderbird's waters and skies, with a 2 for the Firebird's forests and orchards. Storm and sky would be low for the Firebird, higher for the high-flying Simurgh, and blazing at 3 for the Thunderbird. Healing would be a quiet 1 for the Firebird, a radiant 3 for the Simurgh, and a 2 for the Thunderbird, which heals through rain and restored balance. If you turn that matrix into a theme heat map in your mind, you might imagine warm colours where motifs burn brightest. In the very centre, where all 3 birds overlap, the colours are hottest around guidance, mystery, rebirth, transformation, liminality, and nature connection. That shared core glows like coals that never quite go out in human storytelling. Around the edges, the colours shift. Over the Firebird, risk, desire, and the tension between reward and danger burn especially bright. Around the Simurgh, the band of healing and wisdom shines like a halo, tied to teaching, medicine, and spiritual awakening. Around the Thunderbird, the strip labelled storm and sky flares almost white, joined by strong reds for community protection and environmental balance. This imaginary heat map shows that the 3 birds belong to one family of ideas, yet each carries a local accent, shaped by land, history, and need. Because stories are carried in bodies and senses as well as in ideas, it also helps to keep a small imagery and sensory bank in mind, a shared store of feelings and pictures. In that bank, we find the sharp smell of ozone before rain, and the smokier scent of burning feathers, the sting of winter air on cheeks, and the sudden comfort of warmth when a magical bird draws near. The sound of thunder rolling over plains, of great wings beating mountain air, of a single bright note ringing out in a dark orchard. The sight of gold against black, of turquoise and copper against snow, of blue-black wings lit from within by lightning. The feeling of standing at a threshold, at the edge of a forest, on a cliff, by a window at night, knowing that if you step forward, something in you may change. These repeated sensory patterns help listeners in different cultures feel, in their own bones, what these birds mean before anyone explains it. Why do such similar shapes appear in places so far apart? Some scholars point to travel and trade. Stories follow traders, pilgrims, and conquerors. Ideas blend. A tale of a firebird from one culture might be retold in another land with new colours and names. But there is also convergent imagination. A child in Russia, a shepherd in Iran, and a fisher on a North American coast all watch real birds cross the sky. They all feel winter give way to spring, see storms break droughts, and sense that life is fragile. It is not surprising that many of them picture a great bird as the face of those forces. We can gather these explanations into a few clear shared theme statements. First, these great birds give a face and voice to deep psychological archetypes: the nurturing parent, the testing flame, the protecting storm, and the wise guide who stands just beyond ordinary reach. Second, they answer seasonal and ritual needs by turning the return of light, the coming of rain, and the healing of bodies and communities into stories that can be celebrated, repeated, and woven into ceremonies. Third, they rise from environmental catalysts: long winters, high mountains, sudden storms, droughts, and migrations that press human beings to imagine powers larger than themselves in the shapes they see overhead. Fourth, they travel and transform through cultural transmission, moving along routes of trade, conquest, and storytelling, so that a feather of meaning dropped in one place can be picked up, repainted, and cherished in another. In the end, the Firebird, the Simurgh, and the Thunderbird are three local answers to a shared human question. How do we live with powers bigger than ourselves? Fire, weather, time, and the mysteries of the heart. These myths do not give simple rules. Instead, they offer images: a feather that will not cool, a wing that shelters an abandoned child, a shadow that rolls thunder across a thirsty field. If you ever find yourself awake late at night, you might imagine that small, glowing feather on your own windowsill. It does not have to belong to any one bird. It can simply stand for the stories that travel between people and across centuries. Those stories, like the feather, are warm to the touch. They light up dark rooms. They ask gentle but serious questions. And, like the great birds that dropped them, they invite us to step out of what we already know and grow a little braver, a little wiser, and a little more kind.
End of The Firebird Across Cultures. Outro. Thank you for joining us for The Firebird Across Cultures, written by Clara Whitmer and narrated by Evelyn Hart. We appreciate you listening and hope you enjoyed discovering the fascinating journey of the Firebird across different traditions. For more great selections, be sure to visit mynovabooks.com. Thank you for being a valued listener.